So strikes on oil refineries are back. Last night, explosions were heard in Oryol. Russia's local oil refinery was attacked. By the way, have you noticed that the Russian leadership is using a lot less newspeak in their rhetoric lately? I mean, now they actually call a fire, not just smoke. And more often they're calling pops what they really are, explosions. Even the Baldy Soros himself recently called the war a war. We've come to this point, huh? So here are the key details about the strike in Oryol. The target was the oil refinery and the adjacent oil depot. At least 4 explosions were heard there. That means 4 drones arrived and hit exactly where they were supposed to. The facility services the Druzhba pipeline and supplies fuel to the Western Military District. Judging by the footage, beavers are a type of drone. Well, of course, now Russian bots will rush in and write that I supposedly live 5 centimeters from the oil depot, that everything is fine here and nothing was hit. Yeah, they did hit it. They did. And by the way, I had an episode when some oil depot had been burning for 7 days straight. The storage tanks were detonating, but so-called Russians would show up and say, we actually live here, and nothing happened at all. Even though their own channels were already showing everything burning and blazing. Basically just the way you like it. Why is the strike on this Oryol oil refinery important? Because it's one of the few remaining major sites for processing and blending fuel for the Western group. And even partially knocking out some of its capacity is a loss to 1,000 tons of diesel per day. That's significant. And now some extremely interesting information about Iran, Israel, Russia, and Ukraine. I had to dig through quite a few sources, but it was worth it. Let me remind you of the latest important news. So now let's move on to the conclusions. The Israeli Air Force struck warehouses and missile launch infrastructure in western Iran. A factory producing electronics in Shiraz was attacked. In Isfahan, an important plant where shaheds were produced was attacked. And now suddenly officials in Tehran have started saying they're ready to make a deal, although it looked rather strange at the official level. They say, no, we're not negotiating while bombs and rockets are coming from Israel. Oh, but you will negotiate. You most certainly will. And now we'll find out why. Well, Donald Trump, of course, stated that if Iran attacks the US in any way, or military bases in the Middle East, it will be met with, and I quote, the full retaliatory power of the armed forces at an unprecedented level. That's what Donald Trump said. Well, we've already heard about this unprecedented level. Donald Trump gave a deadline for the release of hostages in the Gaza Strip and said that if they weren't released, the power unleashed on you would be at an unprecedented, terrifying level. But when the deadline came and the hostages weren't freed, Donald Trump said, well, let Israel handle it themselves. I'm going to play golf. All right, let's begin. Now we're putting all of this together into a very interesting puzzle. I want to start with yet another strike on one of the most important enterprises of the Russian military-industrial complex. This is the one located in the Alabuga Special Economic Zone. Yes, I want to start the conversation about Iran specifically with Alabuga. So there 13, I'm quoting, 13 people were injured, 1 died, and by morning another had passed away in the hospital. The official version, drone debris fell on the checkpoint of the car factory building. But in reality, it was the engine workshop that was hit, where they make shaheds. This is one of the key sites. It's the southwestern part of this special economic zone, Alabuga. And since the end of 2023, mass production of Iranian drones has been set up there. The Russians call them Jiran. But in reality, of course, they're shaheds. Oh, and there was also a strike on one of the most important buildings, the very place where they assemble the engines and install them, which, let me remind you, are delivered from Iran to Russia in disassembled form via the Caspian Sea and then assembled at Alabuga. The process there is quite interesting. They assemble the engine. Some Chinese components are added, for example, the injectors. And then Iranian specialists from the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, involved at the final stage when the warhead needs to be attached to the munition and fueled. Yes, they live on this site. This building, by the way, is referred to as Building 12 in internal documents, and it is guarded by FSO officers. What a wonderful collaboration. Well, in general, when I was researching this, some of the information came from leaked documents, some I had to dig out from comments, and some from mini investigations that had been published. All in all, there are some truly fascinating things happening in Alabuga. Very interesting process. So they use Iranian molds, epoxy resin from China, all in the workshop where the composite bodies are assembled. The tail assembly is from Mado. That's the Iranian production line that was installed and set up by Iranian specialists. And the engines are also supplied by Mado. And the final assembly is handled by the IRGC. And as for the warhead-only specialists from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and a select group of important Russian experts are allowed access, that's exactly where it should go, to Core 12. Now, that would be something. In 2022, 200 Russian specialists completed a 6-day course in Isfahan. And in 2023, the installation of these Iranian production lines began, along with the first do-it-yourself kits, as I call them. That is, they arrive disassembled. First of all, more of them fit into the containers this way. And then they try to localize production there, for example, assemble their own engine. But so far, they've been using the Iranian one. And they have students assembling the parts at those stages where no special skills are required. And actually, the involvement of students and even school children there is also quite interesting. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Let more people know the truth. Maybe you have acquaintances whose children are studying in Alabuga. Now we'll get to their unenviable fate. So they're recruiting school children and students, a 4-year course, 10 to 15-hour shifts, just so you understand, and 2 million ruble fine for disclosing any internal information. This is Alabuga Polytech. And then there's Alabuga Start. These are young women from African countries who are lured in with promises like you'll be working in the hotel business or somewhere like that. In reality, it's assembling casings, working with epoxy, toxic materials, and so on and so forth. Well, in general, I don't think they're really putting up much resistance because compared to what they would earn back home, they're actually being paid quite a lot. And I had a program where I talked in detail about this Alabuga. Enormous resources have been invested there to attract young people with all sorts of perks provided for them. They even created an entire network of TikTok accounts. A bunch of students are made to film and promote it themselves. It's part of the program, kind of like what Poplavsky does, it seems. And the reason for this little investigation into Alabuga was a review from one of the parents, specifically a mother, who wrote that they did not agree for their children to be assembling weapons of murder against us, against Ukrainians. In principle, you can take your child out of there, but then you'll have to pay for all the months of their education. So the contract there is set up like this. The education is conditionally free, and I think you don't even need to take entrance exams. But you study for free, but if you want to leave, you have to pay for all the months you studied. So what is provided for those who diligently assemble deadly shaheds? There are people who say, we didn't sign up for this. They've really created a kind of military digital concentration camp there. But what is provided for those who happily assemble extra Shahed bodies? In 2023, about 100 of the best students from Alabuga interned at IRGC factories in Tehran, studying technologies for cutting Shahed composites, as well as many other sciences useful to them. This is just, by the way, about how the poor kids supposedly aren't doing anything wrong. After all, they're just screwing together some bodies there. Just so you understand, there are the best ones among them who are sent for internships in Iran. It is precisely these people who will later head various sectors in Russia for the production of these instruments of death. This is the elite of the Putin youth. Obviously, you hardly have to pay the students anything at all, so it's a perfect setup. But this story is also perfect for Putin because starting from the school bench, from their student years, he stains them with blood, making the best of them into specialists in developing production lines and modifying shaheds. In other words, he is essentially programming killers and creators of this weapon. So that's how things are. By the way, there was a scandal there, but it was quickly hushed up. Some students suddenly died at the facility. Whether it was related to the strikes or not, because there were 3 strikes there, I don't know, but the scandal was quickly covered up, censorship kicked in, and so on. Even that didn't discourage anyone from wanting to study at this Alabuga. But now The Guardian reports that after the explosion in the engine workshop, production has been halted at least until the end of the month. And that is very, very serious. It has exposed the vulnerability of the entire chain. ID's Shaheds, I'll say it again, it would be much harder for Putin without North Korean ballistic missiles and above all without Iranian Shaheds. How much trouble have these Shaheds already caused in Ukraine? Just imagine these regimes that don't create anything constructive. All they do is churn out weapons. We'll get to that in a moment as well. So the vulnerability of these chains is enormous. That's why if you hit the three main workshops, or even better, Building 12, along with the IRGC specialists, then it's goodbye to the entire production. In fact, this is the main hub, naturally, for Russia's serial production of these Shaheds. Let me emphasize once again, the production lines are Iranian, the composite materials are Iranian, the resins are Chinese, and the engines are Iranian. That's all there is to it. And now, the most interesting part, despite everything Roscosmos, the Fedor robot, nanotechnologies, and billions from selling oil, gas, diamonds, and timber, Russia still cannot produce engines for the Shaheds. By the way, these engine that they buy from Iran is a cheap replica of an engine that is manufactured in Germany. So Germany can make the engine. Iran, which has been under sanctions for what feels like 1 billion years, can do it. China can do it. Russia cannot. Despite all the wealth I just listed. But this is, by the way, very clearly seen in the automotive industry. Germany, defeated in World War II, makes excellent cars. But Russia, it is capable of is assembling a Chinese Moskvich, naturally from foreign parts. By the way, Iran supplies these engine components to Russians and to Russia using fake documents. They are labeled there as components for cargo drones, for agricultural drones. And in fact, the investigation mentions that all this production among themselves, or in the official documentation, is referred to as the manufacturing of motorboats. And they are so foolish, so uncivilized that, for example, they officially show on TV and cover the visit of the assistant and deputy of Belousov, the Minister of Defense, who is responsible precisely for all these drone-related areas, to the factory that produces these motorboats. Well, in general, everything is absolutely clear there. By the way, it should be mentioned that all these top people, Putin, Yugin, yes, the ones who ran off to Iran, studied there, came back, and are now sharing their knowledge. All the names, surnames, contacts, and passwords are known to those who need to know them. So each of them should think 100, 200 times whether they should continue their activities or not. You've seen how God's service works, how the GUR operates. You've probably seen it in your own news, in Russian news as well. So, well, it's not like there will be enough scooters for everyone, but honestly, it would be a kind of karmic story if those very devices they produce to kill others started exploding in their own hands. Anything can happen. If they themselves don't have any brains, maybe their parents or acquaintances do, and they'll understand. By the way, I'm not just talking about this war right now. This is actually groundwork for future wars as well. Everyone is known, everyone is being watched. And as for the role of IRGC specialists, it's just perfect. There are about 20 to 40 of them there. So at the final stage where the fuel is loaded, according to the technology, where those special boards and munitions are connected, that's exactly where they don't allow any students or civilian engineers. Everything related to explosives and the fuel system is their area of responsibility. Of course, how could the Russian Foreign Ministry not be outraged that Iran is being bombed? I mean, they recently stated, remember that attacking sleeping cities at night is sacrilege. Yes, cynical ghouls. And now about how Israel helped Ukraine on the night of June 13th to 14th, the Israeli Air Force carried out strikes on that very plant in Isfahan, where they assemble the bodies and make those do-it-yourself engine kits that are later sent to Russia. In the same wave of strikes, damage was inflicted on Shiraz Electronics Industries. This is the plant responsible for the mass production of autopilots and controllers for Shahed. In other words, the strike targeted both the brains and the engine of the Shahed, which among other things were being sent to the Russian Federation. Why is this so painful for Moscow? Take the strike on Isfahan, for example, where the carbon fiber body, the tail assembly, and the engine are made about 50% of the facility's capacity has been put out of commission. And in Shiraz, where the autopilot boards are produced, up to 60% has been affected according to estimates, with 2 assembly lines damaged. And the modular engine workshop, this Madon Isfahani, which sends engines to Russia, also suffered serious damage. So thanks to Israel. And in general, there are some interesting coincidences here. Ukraine is carrying out Operation Web. Drones are taking off from Russian territory and striking Russian aircraft. Israel has its own operation drones, are taking off on Iranian territory. They even show the kind of honeycomb-like box from which they were launching. And there were synchronized strikes on one of the most important production hubs for Shaheds, both in Russia and in Iran. Interesting coincidences. The intelligence services are coming up with good ideas. So how could this affect things? That is, by the end of the summer, the pace of massive attacks could drop by 30 to 40% due to a shortage of components. And the quality of these new germs could deteriorate significantly. It should take Iran at least half a year to restore production to its previous level, provided that the strikes are not repeated. And I'm sending a signal out into space, including to my friends in Israel, some of whom hold official positions, that the complete destruction of key Shahed production sites benefits Israel as well. And by doing so, they will force a significant retreat. They will help Ukraine. Now, Russia might try to rapidly localize production there, but that would be much more expensive, and they would need new supply chains requiring even more components from China. In short, it's complicated. So, with just one raid, Israel created this critical shock in the Shahed production chain. That's why this is good news. And we have even more great news on this topic. It turns out that Trump vetoed Israel's plan to kill Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. Reuters reports this, citing two American officials. Basically, he said there's no need to kill him. That's actually an interesting point. With Trump, I think you remember the episode where I talked about his tricks in the art of making deals. Trump's main trick is probably to walk away from a deal at the very last moment. He talks about this all the time. When your partner or whoever you're making the deal with is already counting the money in their head, already thinking about how things will go, you suddenly, without any warning, walk away from the deal at the very last moment. And they're like, what? How? Total shock. What happens then? And then you come back, and according to Trump, they'll agree to much tougher terms on your side. He says, this is my thing. I'm so clever. This is what I do. Well, to me, this is basically just cheating. But for Donald Trump, this is called the art of the deal. And that's exactly what happened here. There's a theory that Trump understood everything perfectly well, knew exactly what, where, and how the strikes would affect things. You see, Iran is already waving a little flag. For now, it's just quietly sticking a hand out from the bunker. But I think that with each strike, the white flag will get bigger and bigger, and the terms Iran will be willing to accept will get better and better for Israel and the United States. So that's one version of events. I don't know. Write in the comments what you think. And it turns out that Russia has evacuated its scientists from Iran. The Russian Foreign Ministry is reporting on this. Who was there anyway? Botanists, researchers of flora and fauna. Who was actually there? Although I looked for information, it seems that they really did evacuate scientists who were involved in some humanitarian matters, who were at some conference there. But as for those very nuclear physicists who are almost there on a permanent basis, no one evacuated them anywhere. At least no one will ever report about that. Well, I think they all got out of there quickly anyway. And the supreme leader I already mentioned, the bunker and the white flag, the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, went into hiding in a bunker after the start of the Israeli operation. He has already hidden there once before. This bunker is located in the north of Tehran, in the Lavasan district. Well, his family has also moved there. In that area, internet speed has been restricted and drone flights are prohibited. So there is indirect evidence suggesting that he is apparently hiding somewhere in those bunkers. But as we've seen, even a bunker doesn't save, for example, Hamas leaders from just retribution. As of this morning, he has effectively disappeared. I mean, the leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, right now, he has disappeared from the public eye for the past few days only, photos and audio, with that characteristic bunker echo. Basically, he's sitting in a bunker waiting to see how it all ends. Well, now he'll know what happens when you ban dogs. Let me remind you, in Iran, dogs, the religious, ultra-religious fanatical leadership considers dogs to be unclean animals. They banned walking them in public places, And they've banned a lot of other things too. Western music, they've cracked down hard on women's education. Women in general, I even did an entire program about this. So you see, now you'll know what happens when you ban dogs. Sit there in your bunker and think about your behavior. And now Iran is saying that they're apparently ready for a deal just to stop the shelling. The thing is, the effectiveness of the ballistic missile strikes, we've seen those hits, but there hasn't been any serious damage, nothing on the scale of what happened in Iran, nothing that's severe in response. Yes, there was the oil storage facility in Haifa. Yes, residential neighborhoods were hit. Unfortunately, there are casualties and people have been injured. My condolences to the families of those who lost loved ones, and I wish a speedy recovery to those who were injured. I think the losses among the elite have shaken up the leadership of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps the most. I believe everyone is starting to realize that now time is running out. It's a matter of hours, of days. Especially when it comes to the leadership of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the military leadership, yes, that's the case. That's why Iran is requesting mediation through Qatar, Oman, and Riyadh. There is information about this. Now, they have about 50% of their centrifuges left underground in Fordo. They're actually at a depth of 100 meters. So, in fact, they can certainly restore their nuclear program. And they still have a strong apparatus for suppressing protests. Naturally, that is, if something suddenly starts there now, they still have all of that. So why can't a deal be made? This is what I was talking about at the very beginning, right now. This is my version, my opinion. You may agree or disagree. So the previous experience of 2015, the easing of sanctions that had been imposed on Iran before that, after that, Iran invested, they had billions unfrozen, tens of billions. After that, Iran invested record amounts in Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. By 2022, the number of uranium enrichment centrifuges had increased fivefold. So that's where the money went, what I call terrorist DNA. The IRGC and the clerical elite are existentially bound to the idea of exporting the revolution. Any concessions are merely a tactical pause for them. That's why, unlike in Syria, there is simply a ready secular opposition in Iran. There is a deep social demand there to replace these fanatics. Therefore, if a deal is made now, everything Iran gains from selling its energy resources will, after a while, go toward the rapid accelerated development of a nuclear bomb, building additional underground cities, missiles, and exchanging technologies with Russia and others. In short, you will end up with a much stronger Iran. All those things that were recently shown underground, those cities with missile launchers, it's all thanks to those who, many thanks to them, eased sanctions on Iran without dismantling the regime that survives by exporting revolutions. That's why before long, a not fully defeated Iranian regime will become much more dangerous and deadly than it is now. So what should be done then? The question is not just who is to blame, but what should be done. By the way, friends, let me remind you that we have an important fundraiser going on. There's just a little bit left to reach our goal for our UAV operators, for our friends, for the Global Drone Academy, which is training thousands of highly skilled UAV operators on various types, from assault drones to reconnaissance, and even those we can talk about openly. In short, they're really awesome, and right now they have a large group in training. We only have a little left to raise. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. And in the comments to this video, if you're not watching on my channel, there's a QR code here that goes directly to the Global Drone Academy's donation page, which you can contribute to. If you're donating from abroad, there's also a PayPal link in the description. And for that, I always want to say a huge thank you to you. And I still can't get over the fundraiser we closed for Uncle Sasha. The girls recently posted both the unboxing of that dome-shaped electronic warfare device and Sasha himself. He's such a salt-of-the-earth guy. So please support the fundraiser if you're able to. So what needs to be done? First, the nuclear program needs to be hammered until it reaches the point of no return. This is difficult. It will take at least a few more days of strikes. Next, a direct ultimatum to Iran, complete destruction of the centrifuges and removal of enriched uranium abroad. That's it. There's no other way. Dismantling of missiles with a range of over 500 kilometers and transferring them under external control for storage. A halt to arms supplies, of course, to proxies with monitoring on the Yemeni and Lebanese fronts. That's all. Unrestricted access for the IAEA, that would be a necessary condition. And of course, support for civil society expanding access to independent internet, humanitarian corridors. We all know that sometimes Western radio and genes undermine dictatorships much more effectively than bombs, because Munich in 1938, when they tried to appease you know who, and we all know how that ended. That's exactly why I say that a deal with Putin is Putin too, who will learn from past mistakes. Maybe not this Putin, maybe some kind of successor will come or someone else. They'll come and cause even more trouble. They'll draw conclusions, they'll restructure everything afterwards. That's why demolition, fragmentation, and so on. Yalta, unlike Munich in 38, Yalta in 45 showed that the firm capitulation of militaristic states leads to a revolutionary decrease in the escalation of violence. That's how it was in Europe after 45.